And we're back, episode 2. It's been really interesting, Brent, to see how many people are listening to the podcast, back to pursuing the perfect pint. And have you had any feedback about the podcast so far?
Yeah, I have had some, and it comes from different areas, and sometimes maybe someone you didn't expect to mention it, or you haven't actually had too much interaction with them, but they've just mentioned in passing that they've listened to it. So I guess that's good feedback. It tells us that we got to keep our game at a high level, or maybe raise our game as we go.
So, beyond being a storyteller, Brent, what else is RMI Analytics doing?
Well, I think where the podcast fits in quite nicely is on top of the insights we deliver and bringing people together in events. We'll talk about it a bit later on our Australian trip. But I think where the podcast fits in nicely is as we travel around the world and interact with people, we actually come in contact with these great stories. And the podcast is basically the platform that we can use to bring those stories to life. And it really augments nicely with the insights we deliver through the journal and so on, and the conference, of course, which we'll talk about often, and these regional events that we've done, bringing people together. I think the podcast is a nice extension of all those things.
So, you and I, Brent, had a call quite early the other week, and I think that's because you just done rather a brutal trip to the last RMI location.
Yeah, well, Australia is a wonderful place to visit. It is a long way, and it does take effort. So, yeah, we did that. I'm back now, and I'm probably 95% adjusted back to time zones, but really good. And as I said, we interacted with the grain industry of Western Australia, many of the people from our network for 2 days of a summit. So, and I saw some barley fields, and it looks pretty amazing. So there's really nothing better than to see it firsthand and to stay connected with people that you don't see so often. So yeah, it's a long journey, but it's certainly worth it, I would say.
And a big player in the whole malt barley sort of supply chain,
Yeah, it
Australia.
is. It is quite important. Yeah, it's quite big, and it's quite a big element of the world's supply chain.
So you saw the barley in the fields there. So what's it? What are we seeing right now for quality for this year?
Yeah, well, it depends which side of the pendulum you're sitting on. But I guess what we just released in our journal last week is the supply of barley in general is only getting bigger. We're just seeing better crops. Europe turned out slightly better than anyone thought about. In Canada, we're thinking production is slightly higher than we thought a month ago, and the prospects in Australia, Argentina are very good. So, we're, I think, for about the third or fourth consecutive journal, we've increased the total level of production. It may go up a little bit higher, so we're approaching 150 million tons of barley globally. That's one big step. The other is the actual results of these crops are generally pretty good. I would say they're average to slightly above average, which means from a quality standpoint, we actually have more malting barley, relatively speaking, than on average in a time when we actually don't need it because demand's down,
Yeah, that seems crazy.
whiskey production's down, beer volumes are still in the third year decline. So we just have more than ample supply of malting barley. And the end result is when you look at simple economics, supply's up, prices are down. So back to the pendulum, if you're a brewer, you are going to see lower prices coming out of this. It's been a steady decline. We actually are getting where malting barley prices aren't so different from feed barley prices. And a, a watch out in a way, Danielle, would be there will be farmers this coming year, 2026, that will have very good quality barley that would normally make malting grade is going to go into feed channels. It will be fed as animal feed. That's a very bad result for farmers. It is what's going on, but it does exemplify the fact that we have a very small difference between malting barley price and feed price. So good for brewers and distillers from that standpoint, bad for farmers from the side. The prices are low, probably definitely be low cost of production, and it will have some implications in next year's crop planning phase.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So on the one side, you've got the brewers who'll be sitting opposite their maltsters, not having to have a discussion about quality, but then what does that mean for the farmers for the coming years?
Yep. And it's difficult in all crops. So prices are down. We're in an economic slowdown. So demand is
Yeah.
generally weak. Flour millers would say the same thing. So I think it's a very wide reaching impact.
So what do you think is going to happen next year, Brent? 2026. What's RMI's perspective?
Well, the early projections are probably lower barley production, but what we just completed was our 2026 budget report. That's a 20-page document that dives a bit deeper into each of the regions, which includes the barley position that we just talked about. But we go into the malt capacity utilization in each region, what's going on in areas like energy, and so on. So for anyone that's interested in a deeper dive into the world of malt supply chain, we do this once a year. So this is just finished this week, in fact, upon return from Australia. So people can reach out to us if they want to get access to that report.
So, I mean, you mentioned how we've got not enough volume and then we've got too much barley. Is there any sort of sign on the horizon from the brewers and distillers? So, what's coming our way that might give us a clue as to what's coming forward?
Yeah, well, as I said, we're releasing this podcast on the week of the 20th of October, which is important in the sense that we're going to see the third quarter results from the major brewers. That's very important from the standpoint. It does give us a very good look into what's going on in the volume picture. If we think about AB InBev, Heineken, Carlsberg, those three brewers, publicly traded, represent about half of the world's beer volume. So how they tell us the beer volumes are going at the 3/4 mark of the year, it'll tell us a lot about how the year is shaping up, and maybe a little bit will tell us about how things are heading into 2026. It'll be very good to see if we show any sign of improvement over the half year results. That would be mildly positive. Anyone I talk to isn't telling me glowing reports of malt flying out of the malt houses because brewing demand is up. So I don't want to be pessimistic. I hope that I'm surprised pleasantly, but it more likely is going to be a continuation of what we've seen, which is pretty lackluster beer volumes.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to discussing that when those results are released. Any last thoughts, Brent, before we hear more about your trip down under?
No, I think we're in a difficult time in the sense that harvest is over and we're shaping up a clear view to the supply side of the balance sheet. Demand is the biggest question. We talk about it all the time. What's demand shaping up to be, both in domestic markets in Europe and North America, but also in emerging markets like South America, Africa, and Asia Pacific. So stay tuned. We're hoping for positive news, but the reality is we're probably looking at an extension of some difficult times.
Yeah, makes sense. So, Brent, we were talking about the difficulties of traveling down under with all the time zone differences, but huge advantages as you try and find the perfect pint. So, did you manage to find anything of the perfect pint in Australia while you were there?
Well, Danielle, the one other thing, for the first time in history, we had a small incident. Our bus broke down on the way from the Gage Roads main production facility to the pub restaurant. So we were stranded. Thanks to Uber, we were able to assemble several rescue vehicles and we got to our destination. And as I was saying, it's a wonderful location. So despite a few of those hiccups, we got there and it was well worth the trip.
So what's the lesson there, Brent? Is the lesson that Uber will always get you to the perfect pint, or that nothing will ever stand between you and getting to the perfect pint?
Yeah, I think you just have to be prepared, Danielle. So have Uber on your phone and be ready, because you don't want to get stalled in your pursuit. I think what we're going to share today is the story. So as we were in Perth, Australia already, we took a little journey south towards Fremantle, and we met with Gage Roads Brewery. They have two locations, which you'll hear in the story. They have a main production site, and then they have a pub restaurant down on the river. And
Ooh.
I would say that if you get a chance, anyone that's listening or watching this, if you get to that part of the world, if you're in Western Australia, in the Perth area, you need to go to Gage Roads pub restaurant on the river. It may get you pretty close to the perfect pint. And their story is quite amazing. We spent some quality time with Ross, and you'll hear more from him as we go into the interview. But an amazing part of the world and an amazing story. And there's some other ones that we'll share as well. But for today, we're gonna share with you the story of the Gage Roads Brewery in the Fremantle area. So hope you enjoy it, and then we'll look forward to the next one. Cheers. Well, the RMI Analytics pursuit of the perfect pint has now taken us to Fremantle, Western Australia. They're here with Gage Roads. Ross will tell you more about his story. A bit of a feedback. We've been here for a few days. I've had at least a dozen people tell me you're going to love when you get to Gage Roads. And now we're here, and I guess it wasn't overstated. So I guess, first of all, Russ, you've got quite a following, and maybe you can tell us a bit about how that developed. But start with maybe tell us a little bit about what you're doing and a bit about the whole Gage Road story.
Gage Roads is started 20. We've just celebrated our 20th birthday. Growing from quite small beginnings and growing organically. The brewery, the great story between John and Bill Hodemaker, our two founders, two brothers. Started at an old margarine facility in Palmyra, where we're still based. And it all started with a maxed out $25,000 credit card. They managed to get their those first initial runs of beer sold, and then and now we've grown to producing up to 20 million liters a year with our beer at the stadium and all over the state and with nationwide distribution. So it's been a big journey.
Yeah, big success story. You mentioned earlier about having to chase down where the tapes are on tap to make sure that those are flowing and more importantly got emptied so you could go back and refill them. But came from some very humble beginnings, I guess is the way you look at it.
Yeah, exactly. But I think we've got such a in Western Australia, it's kind of been that was the starting point of craft in Australia, really, and very parochial state as well. So we've been able to bring the public along for that journey and get some really strong support and grow our brand within WA and broadly across Australia as well.
And speaking of brands, your number one brand is Single Fin. We happen to have one here in front of us, so cheers to that.
Cheers.
Tell us a little bit about this one and the rest of your brands.
Yeah, it's in Single Fin. It's been by far our biggest product. I think it really fits with the West Aussie lifestyle in particular. Approachable. We're using some Aussie hops in there too. So Galaxy Enigma, passion fruit, fresh, fruity, but very easy drinking at the same time. So I think it's got a really broad appeal across the market.
Just on the topic of consumers, I guess what we see globally is consumer preferences are changing, and it's maybe sometimes hard to actually predict where they're going. What are you doing? New product development, these things to try to stay connected with consumers.
Yeah, I think there's so many needs or growing wants across the market, and it's trying to find something to meet that need. And so we've got quite a broad. If you look more broadly at Good Drinks, which is our overall company. We offer everything from non-alc, which we've seen really solid growth in, through to cider, RTD, and our one of our biggest products is Matzo's ginger beer. So I think that diversification across a broad number of segments has really helped with our success as well, and kept us relevant and addressed different needs across the market.
And where does non-alcohol fit in that? I guess Australia, two things I guess we've learned this week is mid-strength is extremely well established. So that's one big thing. But we certainly see let's say kind of the pure non-alc. So where do you see that fitting in the overall portfolio?
Well, I think it's still this non-alc. It's a small baseline that is growing off, but it's certainly Yeah Boys our non-alc XPA. And that's got a really good following now as well. People are making some of those decisions, and whether it's that they want to reduce their alcohol intake and they want that to be a fix, or people are putting it in as a spacer between their IPAs to extend the night. There's a multitude of reasons, and I think there's still growth within that segment for different non-alc products and different beer styles as well. I think there's stouts and sour beers too, I think fit in that category well. But I think that mid-strength is a huge market in Australia, and some of the most successful products across the country are in that kind of 3.5% range. And again, I think that fits with climate, some of the drinking culture as well, that you want to sit down and watch a game of cricket and sip on your beer all day, or sit out on your boat out near Rottnest Island and enjoy the whole day. So
yeah. Well, we've heard some of that this week, and I had mentioned in some cases, we start to hear that maybe something that would be kind of mid-strength in the U.S., for example, And some of the people who talked to locally said, well, that's really nothing new. We've been in Australia, you've been doing mid strength forever. So maybe it's just everyone else is catching up.
Yeah.
One idea.
Well, I think it's adjusting a little bit, and I was over in the US a couple of weeks ago for hop harvest there. And it's the first time I've started to see. It's always a struggle to find a beer under about 6% of most of the tap rooms, but there were definitely some beers around kind of in that sub 4 mark, were hop driven as well, and some lighter lagers. So I think again, it's just providing and meeting a whole range of needs. And to be honest, really talking about craft brewing as well, I think the demographic is probably aging a little bit, and people are regulating their alcohol intake, or the amount of the ABV that they're consuming as well. So
we're all getting older.
Yeah,
some of us more than others, but they're all on the same journey. I don't think it's anything you wouldn't mind sharing. I was really interested when you talked about your approach to non-elk is you don't take the same recipe and brew it again and dilute it or extract alcohol. You're actually taking a different approach to the recipe, knowing that you're going after non-elk. So maybe just say a little bit around where that whole idea or concept.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've always got to look at what the end product or the end goal is going to be, and getting that journey, I suppose, is a bit different to a standard beer. When you limit the alcohol or remove the alcohol from a product like that, you're removing a lot of flavour. So the construction of that end product takes it's a little bit of a different approach, and so we're using quite a different malt bill with a lot lower enzyme activity. We're using a very different hybrid yeast strain that is very neutral, and trying to use some hop products that you need to be really careful with the bitterness in there. So it's took a while, particularly with the development of our non-elk. It was sort of 5 or 6 trial brews to adjust and tweak where we were getting to it. It's still kind of a learning exercise, and so those little 1% tweaks as we get, and you can sort of see, you definitely see the standard of non-elk beer and non-alcoholic products is just improved out of sight over the last few years.
On a slightly different channel, we have a request for your help. So a lot of what we talk about is, and we come from a malt supply chain background, and we think generally I always say malt has an identity crisis. You and others would tell me a great story about hops, and more, and that's the reason we do the podcast, is to shed more light on the role of malt in beers, and maybe eventually could we get a beer brand or one of your brands even that's kind of woven around an Aussie barley story, because you got one of the major barley production regions of the world in your backyard, and it seems almost natural that could we start to bring some of that barley to malt story and get it in front of the consumers and try to just raise that awareness. So it's a small request, but I guess we think it's important. And if you could just tell us maybe your first reaction to the idea of how we tell a better malt story.
It's sexy and keeping it new and interesting. But I mean, malt-driven beers are amazing. I think quality is a really important part, and again, that's sort of parochial West Australian side of things as well. I think we've got the best barley, wheat, and oats in the world. So it's some great raw material. Sometimes it's about whether it's a new malt variety and I really enjoy brewing in the past with some of those older varieties as well, that at least from a craft brewing point of view are easier to brew with, and
like a heritage here.
Scooter was a great one for us, and I think there's definitely an avenue, and I think that's a great selling point, is around the provenance of where that malt's coming from, and the focus on the crafted malting, what the guys do there, and connecting that whole story right the way through the supply chain from basically farm to glass is a really important one that we've been working on it.
So we've got you converted. You're on board for telling the malt story.
Sure, I love it.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll try to drive to close. I guess when we were at the brewery, I jokingly said, Ross, if you see us stranded on the side of the road, you can stop and get us. Not knowing that about 10 minutes later, our bus broke down and we were on the side of the road, but we got here. So when we talk about the pursuit of the perfect pint, what would your impression be, or your vision of what's the perfect pint as you see it?
Oh, that's kind of what you're always looking for, and it's a hard question. But for me, no matter what, it's all about balance, and I think that's the philosophy or our approach to the beers that we make here as well. Is I want a beer that's in balance, no matter what ABV it is, or whether it's malt driven or hop driven. There's got to be an element of balance there. So I like enjoying a full pint, and we've always had the 6-pack test, and if the beer doesn't pass that, it's not going through. So I guess it's just appearance is a big part of it too. Love a nice beer, nice foam on top of it. I prefer clear beer if it's me personally, but ultimately balance is the number one thing. And some of the story behind it too. Sometimes the enjoyment of that pint is the moment and the location and the glassware. So there's a lot that can feed into it, and I've got so many of those beer memories, which I think it wasn't just the beer; it was the place and the location and the home.
Has a lot to do with it. So, okay, well, with that, thanks again, Ross, for all the time today, and I guess to anyone listening to this, if you get to Perth, Fremantle area, you got to get to Gage Roads. It might be where you find the perfect pint. So with that, cheers. The perfect pint. Thanks.